The number on the screen was wrong. It had to be $3.14. My life savings slash the culmination of 6 years of grueling part-time jobs, scholarships I bled for, every birthday check I'd ever received had been reduced to the value of a cheap cup of coffee. I refreshed the page. The number remained, mocking me with its stark finality. $3.14. Panic, cold and acidic, churned in my stomach. Hacked. It had to be a hack. I scrambled through the transaction history, slash my heart hammering against my ribs, and then I saw it. Not a string of insidious, small withdrawals from a stranger. One single massive transfer 2 days ago to a corporate account I didn't recognize, an authorized transfer, authorized from our home IP address. A cold panic began to morph into something else, something hot and terrifying, a dawning horror that felt like falling. There were only two other people who had access, who I had trusted with the login information in case of an emergency: my parents. I found them in the living room. My father, Richard, was reading the Financial Times slash a portrait of suburban satisfaction in his leather armchair. My mother, Eleanor, was arranging flowers in a vase, humming softly. They were a perfect picture of domestic tranquility, a picture that was about to be shattered. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice came out as a croak, thin and fragile. My mother looked up, her smile serene. "Where's what, Leo, darling?" "The money," I said, my voice gaining a raw edge. "My savings, all of it. Where is it?" My father lowered his newspaper, his expression one of mild annoyance at being disturbed. "Ah, yes. We were meaning to talk to you about that, son." There was no surprise in his eyes, no alarm, only a calm, infuriating condescension. "Talk to me about what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "About emptying my entire bank account, about stealing $64,000. The number hung in the air, obscene and enormous. My mother flinched slightly, but my father remained placid. Now, Leo, don't be so dramatic," he said smoothly. "We didn't steal it, we invested it." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. "You what?" "It's a wonderful opportunity," my mother chimed in, her voice bright and brittle. "Your father's old friend from the club, he started a new venture, boutique vineyards in an up-and-coming region. It's poised for explosive growth. We just needed a bit more capital to get in on the ground floor." "You needed my capital?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like it was dissolving my bones. "The money for my university deposit, the money for the startup incubator program I was accepted into, my entire future." "Exactly," my father said, as if explaining something to a simple child. "This investment is your future. It's the family's future. In 5 years, that 64,000 will have tripled, maybe more. It's a far better return than some silly little app idea you cooked up." He dismissed my dream, the project I had poured my soul into, with a wave of his hand. The betrayal was a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. It wasn't just the money. It was the complete and utter disregard for me, for my life, for my choices. I was not a person to them. I was a resource, an account to be drained when it was convenient. "You had no right," I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a vast, empty cold. "We have every right," my father countered, his voice hardening. "We're your parents. We know what is best. You're young, you're impulsive. We secured your money. One day, you'll thank us." I looked at their faces, their smooth, unbothered expressions. They truly believed it. They had stolen my future and wrapped it up in the pretty paper of parental concern, and they felt good about it. They felt righteous. In that moment, something inside me broke. The son who loved them, the boy who trusted them, he died right there on the beige living room carpet. And in his place, something new and cold began to take root. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked out of the room. I went upstairs, packed a single bag with a few clothes and my laptop, and walked out of the front door without another word. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I could never stay another second in that house, breathing the same air as the people who had amputated my life. That first night, I slept on a bench in the train station. The cold of the plastic seeped into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the ice in my chest. The next morning, I made the only call I could, Marcus. Marcus was my oldest friend / a man who viewed the world with a blunt, pragmatic cynicism that I suddenly found was the only thing that made sense. He didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. He just listened to my story on the phone and said, "There's a couch at my place with your name on it. Get over here." His apartment was small, cluttered, and smelled of coffee and soldering fumes. It felt like the safest place on earth. He let me sleep for almost a full day. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, hollowed out and exhausted, he handed me a mug of black coffee. "So," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter, "what's the plan?" "I don't have one," I admitted, my voice raspy. "They took everything, Mark. The university program is gone. The incubator spot requires a buy-in I can't afford." "It's all gone, okay," he said, nodding slowly. "So the original plan is shot, grieve it for a day, punch a pillow, get drunk, whatever. But tomorrow, you make a new one." His gaze was intense. "Are you going to let those two narcissistic parasites win? Are you going to let them be right about you?" The question hit me harder than my father's condescension. "Are you going to let them be right?" My father's words echoed in my head. "You're young, you're impulsive." He saw me as a child who needed his money secured. Proving him wrong suddenly became a biological imperative. It was more than just getting the money back. It was about erasure. I would erase the weak, trusting boy they had robbed. I would become something they couldn't comprehend. Something they would fear. A new feeling began to stir beneath the grief. Revenge. It was a cold, clean fire. It burned away the tears and the self-pity, leaving behind a core of pure, hard resolve. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in days. "They are not going to be right." Marcus smiled faintly, a rare and precious thing. "Good. Now drink your coffee. We've got work to do." The years that followed were a blur of relentless, grinding work. The grief and rage didn't disappear. I simply learned to use them as fuel. Every time my body screamed for sleep, I remembered my father's smug smile. Every time I wanted to give up, I pictured my mother's casual dismissal of my dreams. It was a poison, but it was also a stimulant. I abandoned the idea of university. It was a luxury I could no longer afford. Instead, I turned Marcus's cluttered apartment into my classroom. I devoured every book on economics, finance, and venture capital I could find. I taught myself to code with a monomaniacal focus, learning programming languages the way a starving man learns to hunt. During the day I worked, I took any job I could find. I was a barista, a warehouse stocker, a freelance coder taking on soul-crushing projects for pennies. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. Every dollar I earned that wasn't for rent or food went into a new bank account, an account no one knew about. Its balance grew with painstaking slowness. It was my new seed, my new beginning. Marcus was my anchor. He never questioned my obsession. He would leave food for me when he knew I'd forgotten to eat. He'd listen to my half-mad theories about market trends at 3 a.m. He was the only person on earth who saw the person I was trying to become. My first real break came from a small, overlooked niche in the market. data security for independent app developers. I used my coding skills to build a simple, affordable encryption service. It wasn't glamorous, but it solved a problem. I started with a handful of clients. Word spread. Within 2 years, per my small service had become a respectable business. I finally had capital, real capital. I moved out of Marcus's apartment and into a small office of my own. I hired him as my CTO. We started to invest. We didn't chase flashy startups. We looked for small, solid companies with practical solutions the kinds of unsexy businesses that big venture capital firms overlooked. We were patient, meticulous. My analytical mind, once focused on a single app, was now unleashed. On the entire market, the business grew. My name began to circulate in certain circles. I was no longer Leo, the boy whose parents stole his savings. I was Al Vance, the founder of Argent Capital, a quiet, intensely private investor with a reputation for seeing value where no one else did. I wore tailored suits. I learned to speak the language of power. I built a fortress of wealth and influence around the broken boy I had. Once bitten, I never spoke to my parents. They tried to contact me a few times in the early years their messages a cloying mix of feigned concern and demands for an apology. I ignored them. As far as I was concerned, they were dead. 10 years. A full decade passed. 10 years of sacrifice, of obsession, of a single-minded pursuit of power. Argent Capital was no longer a small firm. We were a force. We managed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. My penthouse office had a view of the entire city. I had everything I had ever dreamed of and more, but the cold fire inside me had never gone out. It was just waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of an email from my assistant. It was a pitch deck from a small company seeking seed funding. The company was called Eleanor's Eden Vineyards, my mother's name. I opened the deck. The pictures showed a struggling vineyard, the vines looking thin and unhealthy. The financial projections were a work of pure fantasy. The company was drowning in debt. The founders were listed at the end. Richard and Eleanor Vance. Their surefire investment had failed. Of course it had. It was built on arrogance and ignorance. And now, after a decade, they were here. Unknowingly, they had come to the very son they had. Betrayed, begging for a lifeline. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was a smile 10 years in the making. The boy on the park bench, the kid with $3 to his name, he was about to get his return on investment. "Sarah," I said over the intercom to my assistant, "schedule a meeting with the founders of Eleanor's Eden Vineyards. Here, in the main boardroom." I paused, savoring the words. "And clear my entire afternoon. I want to give them my full attention, of course." The stage is set and the players are moving into position. Here's the next installment of the story, continuing. From the moment Leo decides to grant his parents a meeting, this response provides the next major installment of our collaborative novel. It focuses on the tense preparation for the protagonist's meeting with his parents, their arrival at his company, and the beginning of the pitch, building the psychological drama and suspense as we approach the inevitable confrontation. Silence in my office after Sarah confirmed the meeting was a living thing. It was the silence of a chessboard after a master has sacrificed a pawn to set up a devastating, inescapable checkmate 10 moves down the line. For a decade, I had been moving my pieces, sacrificing my youth, my social life, my capacity for normal human connection, all for this. All for the moment when my unwitting opponents would walk into my trap, believing it was their sanctuary. I swiveled my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling window. The city sprawled below me, a glittering neural network of lights and lives, every single one of them irrelevant. My world had shrunk to the size of the boardroom one floor below. My father's words from that day echoed in my memory, not as a painful ghost, but as a line of code in my core programming. We know what is best. One day, you'll thank us. I wondered if he'd remember saying that when he was. Standing in my boardroom, his failure on full display / begging for a fraction of the sum he had stolen. The irony was so potent, it was almost a physical taste. I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. What's up? Don't tell me another server farm in Helsinki is overheating. They're coming here, I said, my voice flat. There was no need to specify who they were. In the private language Marcus and I had developed over 10 years, they only ever meant one thing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Leo, are you sure about this? He asked, his voice losing its usual flippancy. What's the play here? You just want to see their faces? I want them to perform, I said calmly. I want them to stand in the room that I built, on the foundation of the life they burned down, and I want them to dance for me. I want them to pitch their pathetic, dying dream to the sun they threw away. I want them to unwittingly illustrate every single one of their failures to the one person who understands their true cost. And then what? Marcus pressed, a note of concern in his voice. You say no, you send them home? Isn't that a little anticlimactic after 10 years? A cold smile touched my lips. Marcus, you're my CTO. You think in terms of systems and outcomes, so think of it this way. This isn't the end of the program. This is the diagnostic. I'm just running the code to see all the errors in their system. The real work begins after I've watched them fail. I could almost hear him shaking his head. You're a scary bastard, you know that? They made me, I replied and hung up. The next 24 hours were dedicated to stagecraft. I walked into the main boardroom, a cavern of gray marble, Bruce head style, and black leather. It was designed to intimidate, to make petitioners feel small and insignificant before they even opened their mouths. It was perfect. Sarah, I said to my assistant as she followed me in with a notepad, for tomorrow's 10 a.m. meeting, I have some specific instructions. I pointed to the vast obsidian table. I want our guests seated at the far end. I will sit at the head. Put 2 bottles of water there for them, no glasses. A small, petty detail, but it was about establishing a dynamic of neglect from the very beginning. I want the presentation screen active, but I will control it from my chair. Dim the main lights by 20% and lower the temperature in the room by 2 degrees just before they arrive. I want the air to have a chill. Sarah nodded, her pen flying across the page. She never questioned my eccentricities. To her, I was just an exacting, reclusive genius. She had no idea she was helping me prepare the theater for the most important performance of my life. One last thing, I said as I was about to leave. When they arrive, have them wait in the reception area for precisely 7 minutes before you bring them here. And under no circumstances are you to refer to me by my first name. To them, I am Mr. Vance. The irony of using my father's name / the name he had disgraced as a shield and a weapon was not lost on me. He had once been Mr. Vance, the man of the house, the one who knew best. Now that title belonged to me. The next morning, I watched them arrive on my office security feed. They stepped out of an old, unimpressive sit-in, a stark contrast to the Blacktown cars and polished sports cars that usually graced our building's entrance. My father, Richard, wore a suit that was at least a decade out of style, trying to project an air of authority he no longer possessed. His shoulders were stooped, the confident swagger I remembered replaced by a nervous tension. My mother, Eleanor, clutched her handbag like a shield. Her face was etched with lines of worry, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring glass and steel lobby of the Argent Capitol Tower. They looked small, lost, pathetic. I felt a surge of triumph so pure and so vicious it almost took my breath away. They were led to a waiting area with low, uncomfortable leather couches. As instructed, they waited. I watched my father fidget with his tie. I watched my mother nervously smooth her skirt. There were two mice in a pristine, high-tech cage, waiting for the scientist to arrive. After exactly 7 minutes, Sarah appeared and led them towards the elevators. It was time. I made my own way to the boardroom, entering through a private door that led directly to the head of the table. I was seated, my back to them, when they were ushered in. The room was chilled, as requested. I could hear their soft footsteps on the marble floor as they walked the long distance to the other end of the table. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to take in the scale of the room, their own insignificance within it. Finally, when the silence had become a tangible pressure, I swiveled my chair to face them. The moment of recognition was everything I had hoped for and more. My mother's face went slack with shock, her hand flying to her mouth. A soft, strangled gasp escaped her lips. My father froze mid-motion, his briefcase slipping from his numb fingers and clattering to the floor. His face cycled through a series of emotions with comical speed, utter disbelief, then confusion, then dawning. Sickening horror. Leo. My mother whispered the name, a fragile question in the vast, cold room. I offered no sign of recognition. My face was a mask of polite, professional indifference. I looked from her to my father, who was still gaping at me like a fish. You must be the founders of Eleanor's Eden Vineyards, I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. I am Vance. Please have a seat. We have a busy schedule. My father seemed to find his voice, a sputtering, incredulous wreck. Leo, Hedistis, what are you? This is your company? We are here to discuss your company, Mr. Vance, I replied coldly, pointedly using his own name against him. Your pitch deck was intriguing enough to warrant a meeting. I trust you're prepared to present it. They were utterly thrown. This was not the reunion they could have ever imagined. There was no tearful son, no dramatic confrontation. Only a cold, powerful stranger wearing their child's face, treating them as if they were insignificant business prospects. Which, of course, is exactly what they were. My mother sank into a chair, looking faint. My father, after a moment of sputtering confusion, seemed to rally. A flicker of his old arrogance returned. He probably thought this was some kind of elaborate joke, a childish prank. He straightened his tie, picked up his briefcase, and sat down. He was going to try and play my game. A fatal miscalculation? Yes, of course, he said, clearing his throat and trying to regain some semblance of composure. Let's begin. He fumbled with his laptop, his hands shaking slightly. As he struggled to connect to the presentation screen, I tapped at control on the arm of my chair. Allow me, I said. Instantly, the first slide of their presentation lit up the massive screen at the end of the room. It was a picture of them, 10 years younger, smiling broadly in a sun-drenched field, a glass of wine raised in a toast. The title read, Eleanor's Eden Vineyards, A Legacy of Passion. A legacy of passion, I mused aloud, letting the words hang in the air. An interesting choice of words. Please proceed. For the next 20 minutes, I was treated to the most pathetic, ill-conceived business pitch I had ever witnessed. My father did most of the talking, his voice strained, his narrative full of buzzwords and empty projections. He spoke of market challenges and unforeseen weather patterns, never once acknowledging the simple truth that he had no idea what he was doing. My mother sat in silence, her eyes fixed on me, her expression a painful mix of fear and a desperate pleading hope. I let him talk, interjecting only with quiet, surgical questions that were designed to bleed him dry. On page 3, I said, my voice calm, you detail your initial seed capital, $64,000. A very specific number. Was that acquired from a single source? My father hesitated. It was a family investment. I see, I said. And what were the terms of that investment? Debt? Equity? What was the expected return for the initial investor? He stammered, unable to answer. There were no terms. There was no agreement. There was only theft. I moved on. Your projections for growth seem highly optimistic, given your current debt-to-income ratio. You've leveraged the property twice. You've defaulted on payments to your suppliers. Your business isn't just failing, Mr. Vance. It's insolvent. You're not here for seed money. You're here for a bailout. Every word was a precisely aimed dart, and I watched them land with cold satisfaction. I was deconstructing their failure piece by piece, using the very language of the world I now commanded. The world they had locked me out of. Finally, he finished. The last slide, a desperate plea for $500,000. Faded from the screen, leaving only the reflection of the three of us in the black mirror of the display. My father looked exhausted, defeated. My mother looked like she was on the verge of tears. Well, my father said, his attempt at a confident tone falling painfully flat. That's our proposal. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. I let the silence stretch again, a symphony of their discomfort. This was the moment. The diagnostic was complete. It was time to deliver the verdict. Thank you for that enlightening presentation. I began, my voice soft and dangerous. You were correct about one thing. Your business is insolvent. It's poorly managed / built on a foundation of wishful thinking and has no viable path to profitability. I paused. It is, Weedhoda dubbed, one of the worst investment opportunities I have ever had the displeasure of reviewing. My mother finally broke. A sob escaped her lips. Leo, please. I held up a hand, silencing her. My gaze was fixed on my father. But the business itself is not the primary issue here, I continued, my voice dropping even lower. The real issue is the foundation, that initial $64,000. I leaned forward, my eyes burning into his. You called it a family investment? Let's talk about that family. Let's talk about the son whose entire future you stole for this vanity project. The carefully constructed wall of professionalism crumbled, revealing the cold, furious core beneath. This was it, the beginning of their real reckoning. And I was going to enjoy every second of it, of course. The confrontation continues. Here's the next part of the story, picking up at the precise moment Leo begins to deliver his final verdict to his parents. This response provides the next major installment of our collaborative novel. The narrative focuses on the protagonist Leo's long-awaited monologue of reckoning, his parents' reactions, and the crucial twists where he reveals he is not just their potential investor, but their new creditor, setting the stage for the stories. Final act, my mother's plea, her soft, pathetic, please, hung in the chilled air of the boardroom and then disintegrated. It was a word that had no meaning here, a currency that had lost all its value. My gaze remained locked on my father, who stared back at me, his face a battleground of fading arrogance and rising panic. Let's talk about that. Son, I repeated, my voice a low, steady thrum of controlled fury. Do you remember him? He was 20 years old. He had just been accepted into a prestigious incubator program that was going to be the launch pad for his entire life. He had worked for 6 years, saving every dollar per, denying himself every youthful indulgence to build a fund of $64,000. I let the number settle between us again, a phantom fourth presence in the room. That boy went to sleep one night believing in his future, believing in the trust he had placed in his parents. And he woke up to find his life's work gone, transferred away in a single, casual act of familial piracy. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of a decade of resentment was heavy enough to crush them where they sat. "Do you know where that boy slept that night, Richard?" I asked, using his first name for the first time, a deliberate yet intimate violation. "He slept on a bench at a train station." He learned that night that the world is a very cold place when you have $3.14 to your name. For the next 2 years, he lived on a friend's couch. He ate instant noodles so he could afford textbooks on corporate finance. He worked 18-hour days coding for companies that paid him pennies, his hands shaking from caffeine and exhaustion, all while you two were, what was it? I glanced at their ridiculous, sun-drenched photo on the screen. Ah, yes, living a legacy of passion. Every word was a stone. And I was building a wall between the man I was now and the people they had been. He learned to stop being that boy. He had to. That boy was weak, trusting, and a liability, so he killed him. And in his place, he built something new. He built a man who runs on logic, not love. A man who understands that trust is a commodity for fools. A man who built an empire not out of passion, but out of the cold, hard math of your betrayal. I leaned back, the monologue complete. I had given them the accounting of their sins. I had shown them the true invoice for their transgression. The cost wasn't $64,000. The cost was me. My mother was openly weeping now, quiet, shuddering sobs that I registered with the same emotional detachment as I would the hum of a server. My father, however, chose the path of defiance. It was his nature. He couldn't accept the totality of his failure. We thought the investment was sound, he blustered, his voice cracking. It was a mistake, a miscalculation. We always intended to pay you back, son, with interest. And look at you now. He gestured wildly around the opulent boardroom. You've clearly done incredibly well for yourself. You're a success. Maybe what we did, maybe it was the push you needed. The sheer, unmitigated gall of that statement was almost impressive. To try and claim credit for my success, to frame his theft as a catalyst for my growth. It was the desperate, pathetic gambit of a cornered narcissist. The last flicker of heat in my chest extinguished, leaving behind only Arctic cold. I slowly rose from my chair and walked around the vast table until I was standing directly behind them. They both tensed, flinching as if expecting a blow. I placed my hands on the backs of their chairs, leaning in so they could hear my whisper. A push, I repeated, my voice soft and venomous. You think you pushed me? You threw me from a cliff. And you are going to learn the difference. I walked back to the head of the table. With a single tap on my console, the screen displaying their shattered dreams went black. Your proposal is rejected, I said, the formality of the words a final insult. Argent Capital will not be investing in your legacy. My mother looked up, a sliver of desperate hope in her tear-filled eyes, the hope that this was the end of it, that the rejection was the entirety of the punishment, that they could now crawl away and lick their wounds. It was time to extinguish that hope forever. But I am a believer in paying back one's debts, I continued smoothly. And you too owe a great many people a great deal of money. The bank that holds the notes on your 2 mortgage, for instance, the suppliers you haven't paid in 6 months. I let that hang in the air for a moment. It's so messy. I find I work best when I can consolidate such problems. A new kind of fear began to dawn on my father's face, a confusion. This wasn't part of the script he had imagined. While you have been making your presentation, I said, my voice as calm as a surgeon's, my legal team has been busy. Argent Capital's acquisitions division has, as of 1 hour ago, purchased all outstanding debt and liens associated with the property known as Eleanor's Eden Vineyards. I looked from my mother's horrified face to my father's slack-jawed disbelief. I am not your potential investor, I stated, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into the dead silence of the room. I am your sole creditor. You no longer owe the bank. You owe me. The transformation in the room was absolute. The last vestiges of a family confrontation evaporated, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of a hostile takeover. They were no longer my parents. They were my assets, my defaulting, financially ruined assets. And I held the leash. My father finally understood. The full catastrophic weight of his miscalculation crashed down on him. This wasn't just a no. This was a checkmate he had never seen coming. He looked like he might be sick. "What do you want, Leo?" he whispered, all the fight, all the arrogance finally gone from his voice. He was a broken man. For now? Nothing, I said. You will return to your failing vineyard. You will continue to work. My representatives will. Be in touch tomorrow with a new, revised budget and a list of performance expectations. You will not sell any assets. You will not contact any other potential investors. You will simply wait for my instructions. I walked toward my private exit. This meeting is over. My assistant will validate your parking. I left them there, 2 statues of ruin in my marble and steel mausoleum. I didn't look back. Back in my office, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, vibrating sense of power. I had done it. 10 years of planning had culminated in a perfect, flawless victory. I had stripped them of their pride, their hope, and their freedom in the space of an hour. I owned them. Marcus came into my office a while later. He didn't ask how it went. He just looked at my face and nodded slowly. You did it then. I did, I said, a rare, genuine smile touching my lips. He didn't smile back. He walked over to the window, looking down at the city. So now you're their creditor. You'll make them work the land. You'll slowly bleed them dry. You'll make them suffer. And then what? Then I'll have my justice, I said simply. Will you? Marcus turned to face me, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. Look at yourself, Leo. This place, this power. You earned it. You built it. But this thing with them, it's turning you into something ugly. This isn't about justice anymore. It's about cruelty. They earned it, I countered, my good mood beginning to sour. No one earns this, he said, his voice rising. Don't you see? You've spent 10 years becoming everything your father wasn't. Successful, brilliant, powerful. But if you go down this road, you're going to end up just like him in the one way that matters. You'll be a man who destroys his own family for his own satisfaction. You won, Leo. For God's sake, take the win and walk away before you burn your own empire down just to watch them shiver in the cold. His words hit me with an unexpected force. I had been so focused on the mechanics of my revenge, on the intricate beauty of the trap, that I hadn't considered the endgame beyond their suffering. I had planned my war, but I had never planned for the peace. What do you do when the enemy is utterly defeated, chained at your feet, and the only thing left to do is decide their fate? Marcus left me alone with my thoughts. The triumphant hum in my veins was gone, replaced by the unsettling echo of his question. And then what? I looked at the sprawling city below, a kingdom I had built out of spite. I had my parents in a cage. But as I stood there in my silent, empty office, I was forced to wonder, who, exactly, was the one on the inside? Of the bars, of course, the final act begins. Here's the concluding installment of the story, exploring the consequences of Leo's victory and the ultimate meaning of his revenge. This response provides the final, concluding installment of our collaborative novel. It follows the protagonist, Leo, as he grapples with the hollow nature of his victory, confronts the human cost of his revenge, and ultimately chooses a path that demonstrates his final transformation, bringing the story to a complete and satisfying resolution. The weeks that followed the meeting were a study in meticulous remote cruelty. I never visited the vineyard. I never spoke to them directly. My revenge was a machine I had built, and now I simply watched it run, administered by a team of impassive accountants and ruthless efficiency experts I dispatched to manage the asset. Their lives, as detailed in the dry daily reports that landed in my inbox, were systematically dismantled. Their club memberships were canceled. Their luxury car was repossessed. Their credit cards were cut off. The budget I approved for them covered basic utilities, cheap groceries, and nothing more. The 2 part-time workers they employed were let go, and my directives were clear. All essential duties on the vineyard, from pruning the vines to mending the fences, were to be performed by the proprietors, by Richard and Eleanor Vance. I would read the reports in my silent, climate-controlled office, 1,000 feet above the city. Proprietor, R. Vance, completed 4 hours of manual weeding. Proprietor A. Vance spent the afternoon bottling the unsellable 2024 vintage. Each line item was a small, satisfying testament to my absolute power. I was forcing them to live my life in reverse. They were experiencing the powerlessness, the grind, the slow erosion of dignity that they had forced upon me. It was a perfect symmetrical justice, and yet Marcus's words echoed in the vast empty spaces of my victory. And then what? The thrill of the initial conquest had faded, replaced by a strange and unsettling hollowness. The daily reports became monotonous. The knowledge of their suffering, which I had craved for a decade, began to feel less like a triumph and more like a tedious administrative task. The fire that had fueled my entire adult life was banking, and I was discovering that there was nothing underneath but cold ash. My work began to suffer. I would stare at pitch decks for brilliant new technologies, but my mind would drift to a dusty field, and the image of my father, a man who once commanded boardrooms, now pulling weeds on his hands and knees. The irony was no longer satisfying. It was just bleak. The empire I had built to crush them felt like a gilded cage I had built for myself. The catalyst arrived on a rainy Tuesday in the form of a Priority 1 notification from my lead agent at the vineyard. It wasn't a financial report. It was a medical incident summary. Proprietor E. Vance collapsed while working. Suspected exhaustion and dehydration. Currently stable but weak. Local physician recommends complete bed rest. I stared at the message, a strange and unwelcome emotion twisting in my gut. It wasn't concern, not exactly. It was an error message, a variable I hadn't properly accounted for. The human body is a fragile system, and I had pushed this one past its breaking point. My perfect, sterile revenge had suddenly become messy. It had a pulse, and that pulse was failing. For the first time in 10 years, I did something impulsive. I told my assistant to clear my schedule, and I drove. I didn't take a company car or a driver. I took my own personal vehicle, a sleek, anonymous black sedan, and headed out of the city toward the life I had destroyed. The vineyard was even more pathetic in person than it had been in the pitch deck. The sign for Eleanor's Eden was faded, one hinge broken. The fields were patchy, the vines struggling. It was a place of profound failure. I parked the car and walked toward the small, modest house I had never visited. The door was unlocked. The house smelled of dust and despair. I found my mother in a small bedroom, lying in bed. She looked ancient. Her skin was pale and thin, her breathing shallow. She was asleep. My father was sitting in a chair by her bedside, his head in his hands. He was no longer the arrogant executive from my memory or the defeated man from my boardroom. He was just a tired old man in a dirty shirt, watching his wife fade away. He looked up as I entered, his eyes hollow. There was no fight left in him, no defiance. "The doctor said she needs rest," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "She's just worn out." Peace was a foreign country I was attempting to colonize. For 2 years I had worked meticulously to establish its borders to build its infrastructure within the quiet confines of my new life. My apartment was a minimalist fortress of calm. My work, as a freelance data security consultant for clients who valued discretion above all else, was intellectually stimulating but emotionally sterile. I spoke to Enya once a week, our conversations a carefully curated dance around the dark crater of our shared past. I had built a life of order, of control, of quiet. But peace, it was learning, was not a territory to be conquered. It was a fleeting state of being as fragile as a soap bubble. Every unexpected footstep in the hallway outside, my door, every car that idled for too long on the street below, every encrypted email from an unknown source. Each was a pinprick, threatening to shatter the delicate surface of my new reality. I lived with the ghost of my sister, the phantom limb of my revenge. Serafina was dead, but the world she had moved in was not. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a data point in a predictable trend, that it was only a matter of time before that world came looking for me. The first tremor came on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of a package, a small, unassuming box left with the concierge in my building lobby. I hadn't ordered anything. I never ordered anything to my home address. That was rule number 1 in the new life. I took the box to my apartment, my heart rate accelerating to a low, steady thrum of pure adrenaline. I scanned it for tracking devices, for biological agents, for any sign of tampering. It was clean, too clean. Inside, nestled in a bed of foam, was a single outdated satellite phone. It was a ghost from a past life, identical to the one I had used on the hunt for Serafina. I placed it on my still kitchen island, staring at it as if it were a bomb, which, in a way, it was. It was a message, a summons, a declaration that my carefully constructed piece was an illusion. For 3 hours, I did nothing. I watched it per my mind racing through probabilities, triad assessments, contingency plans. Who could have sent it? Geosystems, the rival corporation from the Vit Raven deal? Or the other loose end, the one who had run? As dusk settled over the city, the phone chirped to life. A single incoming text message appeared on its tiny screen. It contained only a set of coordinates for a public park across the city and a time, 10 p.m. tonight. My analytical mind screamed at me to ignore it, to dispose of the phone, vacate the apartment, and disappear. It was the logical/rational move. But logic could not account for the part of me that was tired of running the part of me that knew you could not build a fortress against a ghost. Sometimes the only way to deal with a ghost is to confront it. I dressed in dark, practical clothing. I armed myself not with a weapon, but with a series of digital countermeasures on my personal device /ready to wipe my entire existence with a single tap. I was a ghost preparing to meet another. The park was dark, rain-slicked, and empty. I moved through the shadows, my senses on high alert. I saw him before he saw me. He was sitting on a bench under a flickering lamppost, a pathetic, hunched figure trying to make himself small. Even from a distance, I recognized the nervous energy / the paranoid glances over his shoulder. It was Dr. Iris Thorne, the geologist, Seraphine's accomplice. The coward who had fled Vit Ramen while I faced my sister. I approached him from behind, my footsteps silent on the wet pavement. You've gotten sloppy, doctor, I said, my voice low. This is the first place they would. Look, he yelped, scrambling to his feet, slash his face a mask of terror that quickly morphed into relieved recognition. He looked terrible. He was thin, slash his expensive suit replaced by shabby, worn clothes. The arrogant, flashy scientist was gone, replaced by a desperate, hunted animal. Elara, he breathed, his voice shaky. Thank God. I didn't know who else to turn to. You shouldn't have turned to me at all, I said coldly, keeping my distance. Whatever trouble you're in, it's not my concern. It is your concern, he insisted, taking a frantic step toward me. It's about her. It's about geosystems. He was panicked, his words tumbling over one another. They found me. A month ago in Buenos Aires. They didn't try to kill me. Not at first. They interrogated me. They wanted to know about Seraphin's contingency plan. The words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. What contingency plan? Serafina never trusted anyone, Thorne said, his eyes wide with the memory. Not me, not the buyers, certainly not geosystems. Before the Fit Raven deal, she created a dead man switch, a set of encrypted data files containing everything she had on geosystems. The illegal drilling, the corporate, espionage, the murder of Dr. Petrova, everything. It was her insurance policy. If she disappeared or was killed, the files would be automatically released to every major news outlet and intelligence agency on the planet. My blood ran cold. Serafina, brilliant and paranoid to the very end. Of course, she had a final move. Her death on the cliffs wasn't an end. It was the trigger for a new war. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice sharp. Why haven't the files been released? Because they are protected by a multi-layered biometric sequence, he explained, and a final cryptographic key. Geosystems has been trying to crack it, but they can't. They think the key is a person. Someone Serafina trusted implicitly. Someone whose name or identity would be the final password. He stared at me, his meaning hanging heavy and undeniable in the air. They think it's you, Elara. I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with sickening precision. I wasn't a ghost they were hunting. I was a key they needed. But if I was the key, then my life was forfeit the moment they used me to unlock the door. They let me go, Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They thought I would lead them to you. I've been running ever since, but they're getting closer. They are not the only ones looking either. The buyers from the deal, the rival corporation, they want that data too. They want to weaponize it against geosystems. He looked at me, his expression one of pure, desperate pleading. We are caught in the middle. Our only chance is to find those files before they do. We can use them as leverage to buy our freedom. The irony was suffocating. To be forced into an alliance with this pathetic creature, to be dragged back into the heart of the conspiracy I had nearly died to escape. My fragile peace was not just broken. It had been vaporized. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, I said, my mind already racing, how would we even begin to find something that well hidden? Soren reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. Serafina was brilliant, but she was also sentimental. She couldn't resist a bit of theater. This was her private journal. I took it from her. Room on the island before everything fell apart. It's full of her cryptic notes, poetry, nonsense. But I think the clues to the location of the data and the key are in here. Peace was a foreign country I was attempting to colonize. For 2 years I had worked meticulously to establish its borders to build its infrastructure within the quiet confines of my new life. My apartment was a minimalist fortress of calm. My work as a freelance data security consultant for clients who valued discretion above all else was intellectually stimulating but emotionally sterile. I spoke to Anya once a week, our conversations a carefully curated dance around the dark crater of our shared past. I had built a life of order, of control, of quiet. But peace, it was learning, was not a territory to be conquered. It was a fleeting state of being as fragile as a soap bubble. Every unexpected footstep in the hallway outside, my door, every car that idled for too long on the street below, every encrypted email from an unknown source. Each was a pinprick, threatening to shatter the delicate surface of my new reality. I lived with the ghost of my sister, the phantom limb of my revenge. Serafina was dead, but the world she had moved in was not. And I knew with the cold certainty of a data point in a predictable trend that it was only a matter of time before that world came looking for me. The first tremor came on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of a package, a small, unassuming box left with the concierge in my building lobby. I hadn't ordered anything. I never ordered anything to my home address. That was rule number 1 in the new life. I took the box to my apartment, my heart rate accelerating to a low, steady thrum of pure adrenaline. I scanned it for tracking devices, for biological agents, for any sign of tampering. It was clean, too clean. Inside, nestled in a bed of foam, was a single, outdated satellite phone. It was a ghost from a past life, identical to the one I had used on the hunt for Serafina. I placed it on my still kitchen island, staring at it as if it were a bomb, which, in a way, it was. It was a message, a summons, a declaration that my carefully constructed peace was an illusion. For 3 hours, I did nothing. I watched it per my mind, racing through probabilities, trait assessments, contingency plans. Who could have sent it? Geosystems, the rival corporation from the Vit Raven deal? Or the other loose end, the one who had rotten? As dusk settled over the city, the phone chirped to life. A single incoming text message appeared on its tiny screen. It contained only a set of coordinates for a public park across the city and a time, 10 p.m. tonight. My analytical mind screamed at me to ignore it, to dispose of the phone, vacate the apartment, and disappear. It was the logical/rational move, but logic could not account for the part of me that was tired of running purr, the part of me that knew you could not build a fortress against a ghost. Sometimes the only way to deal with a ghost is to confront it. I dressed in dark, practical clothing. I armed myself not with a weapon, but with a series of digital countermeasures on my personal device, ready to wipe my entire existence with a single tap. I was a ghost preparing to meet another. The park was dark, rain-slicked, and empty. I moved through the shadows, my senses on high alert. I saw him before he saw me. He was sitting on a bench under a flickering lamppost, a pathetic, hunched figure trying to make himself small. Even from a distance, I recognized the nervous energy / the paranoid glances over his shoulder. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, the geologist, Seraphine's accomplice, the coward who had fled Flit Raven while I faced my sister. I approached him from behind, my footsteps silent on the wet pavement. "You've gotten sloppy, Doctor," I said, my voice low. "This is the first place they would." "Look," he yelped, scrambling to his feet, his face a mask of terror that quickly morphed into relieved recognition. He looked terrible. He was thin / his expensive suit replaced by shabby, worn clothes. The arrogant, flashy scientist was gone, replaced by a desperate, hunted animal. "Elara," he breathed, his voice shaky. "Thank God." I didn't know who else to turn to. "You shouldn't have turned to me at all," I said coldly, keeping my distance. "Whatever trouble you're in, it's not my concern." "It is your concern," he insisted, taking a frantic step toward me. "It's about her. It's about geosystems." He was panicked, his words tumbling over one another. "They found me." A month ago in Buenos Aires, they didn't try to kill me. Not at first. They interrogated me. They wanted to know about Seraphine's contingency plan. The word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. What contingency plan? Serafina never trusted anyone, Thorne said, his eyes wide with the memory. Not me, not the buyers, certainly not Geosystems. Before the Vit Raven deal, she created a dead man switch, a set of encrypted data files containing everything she had on Geosystems. The illegal drilling, the corporate espionage, the murder of Dr. Petrova, everything. It was her insurance policy. If she disappeared or was killed, the files would be automatically released to every major news outlet and intelligence agency on the planet. My blood ran cold. Serafina, brilliant and paranoid to the very end. Of course, she had a final move. Her death on the cliffs wasn't an end. It was the trigger for a new war. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice sharp. Why haven't the files been released? Because they are protected by a multi-layered biometric sequence, he explained, and a final cryptographic key. Geosystems has been trying to crack it, but they can't. They think the key is a person. Someone Serafina trusted implicitly. Someone whose name or identity would be the final password. He stared at me, his meaning hanging heavy and undeniable in the air. They think it's you, Elara. I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with sickening precision. I wasn't a ghost they were hunting. I was a key they needed. But if I was the key, then my life was forfeit the moment they used me to unlock the door. They let me go, Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They thought I would lead them to you. I've been running ever since, but they are getting closer. They are not the only ones looking either. The buyers from the deal. The rival corporation, they want that data too. They want to weaponize it against Geosystems. He looked at me, his expression one of pure, desperate pleading. We are caught in the middle. Our only chance is to find those files before they do. We can use them as leverage to buy our freedom. The irony was suffocating. To be forced into an alliance with this pathetic creature, to be dragged back into the heart of the conspiracy I had nearly died to escape. My fragile peace was not just broken. It had been vaporized. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, I said, my mind already racing, how would we even begin to find something that well hidden? Thorne reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound notebook. Serafina was brilliant, but she was also sentimental. She couldn't resist a bit of theater. This was her private journal. I took it from her. Room on the island before everything fell apart. It's full of her cryptic notes, poetry, nonsense. But I think the clues to the location of the data and the key are in here. He held it out to me. It felt like he was handing me a snake, my sister's private thoughts, her final secrets. To refuse was to remain a target for the rest of my short life. To accept was to step back into the darkness, to become the hunter once more. But this time, I would also be the prey. I took the notebook. The worn leather was cool against my skin. This is not a partnership, I said, my voice like flint. This is a transaction. I will help you find this data. Once we have it, you and I will go our separate ways. You will disappear, and I will use it to secure my permanent immunity. Are we clear? He nodded eagerly, a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. Crystal, go back to your hotel, I instructed. Wipe your digital footprint. Erase everything. I will contact you on that phone in 24 hours with our next move. He scurried away into the darkness, leaving me alone with my sister's ghost. I returned to my apartment, the sanctuary that no longer felt safe. I called Anya. It was late, but she answered immediately, her voice warm until she heard the tone in mine. I explained the situation in cold, clipped terms. The contingency file, geosystems, Thorn, the journal. Anya was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. I thought you were free, Elara, she said finally, her voice laced with a profound sadness. So did I replied. I need your help, Anya. I need your eyes and ears while I'm in the dark. I need you to be my ghost in the machine one last time. Always, she said without hesitation, her loyalty a single unwavering point of light in the encroaching darkness. What's the first move? I opened the journal. The pages were filled with Seraphine's elegant, sharp handwriting. It was mostly personal reflections, quotes from obscure philosophers / complex diagrams that seemed to mean nothing. I spent hours poring over it per my analytical mind, searching for patterns, for meaning in the chaos of her thoughts. And then I found it, tucked into a passage about her childhood, a memory of a place we used to go to escape, a place I had forgotten. It was a series of numbers disguised as a line of poetry, not a location, a key. The key to a Swiss bank's digital vault, the kind used to store last wills and testaments and digital assets. I had the location, but as I was about to call Anya with the information, a sudden, sharp sound from the street below made me freeze. It was the distinct sound of a car door slamming shut, followed by another, 2 of them. I moved to the window / peering through a slit in the blinds. 2 black sedans were parked across the street, their engines off. 4 men in dark suits emerged, moving with a fluid professional purpose. They were not police. They were looking up, directly at my apartment. My blood ran cold. Dorn. They must have followed him. Or worse, he had let them here. My carefully constructed life, my anonymity, it was all gone. They knew where I was. My personal device buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It contained a single chilling image. A live security camera feed from the hallway outside my apartment door. And on the feed, 2 of the men were approaching, their hands inside their jackets. They weren't here to talk. They weren't here to retrieve a key. They were here to liquidate an asset. They were here to erase me,